Unfortunately, the USIS informed us, provided, I think, to our Korean Film Archive, they found whole script of the movie, which is English translation, but it's going to be a good chance to people really fully see the my father's movie. So really appreciate about all the people to found that this script again. Thank you very much.
Altered the original story considerably. Suffice to say, this film is unlike either Im's or Lee's film. Kim Ki-young's work is not easily categorised. It's sometimes called horror, but that doesn't really fit. It can be hysterically melodramatic, but that doesn't account for the sense of unease his best films generate. But as Chris Berry, a Western pioneer when it comes to the study of South Korean cinema, once observed, if realism and restraint are desired, Kim Ki-young is not your man. Whenever Park Chan-wook is asked about which filmmakers influenced him, the director always nominates Alfred Hitchcock and Kim Ki-young. Bong Joon-ho regards Kim Ki-young as the greatest influence on his own work, evident in the textual links between Parasite and Kim's landmark film The Housemaid, which Bong regards as the Citizen Kane of Korean cinema. I've always taken Bong's comment as a follow-on from Francois Truffaut's remark that Orson Welles' Citizen Kane was the film that inspired the most filmmakers to make films. Likewise, Kim Ki-young's The Housemaid is the Korean film that's inspired so many Korean filmmakers to become directors. As you no doubt recall, Citizen Kane's story is structured around a reporter investigating the death of a media mogul and the recollections of people who were close to the man. Kim Ki-young's film Iodo has a similar structure. A frontman for an alliance of Seoul businessmen arrives at a remote island to question the inhabitants about a local resident who has disappeared. Each of the people interrogated offers their own perspective on the mystery, and each of the overlapping recollections moves the story along. However, that's where the similarities end. Firstly, Iodo has a framing device that sets up the entire investigation as a flashback. Thus, all the interview flashbacks you see are taking place within that framing device flashback. Secondly, the frontman for the business consortium is implicated in the murder of the missing man. While the frontman conducts the interviews with the aim of proving his innocence, he's accompanied by the editor of a regional newspaper who is convinced that the business consortium's frontman is guilty. Let me briefly digress here, and I'll be interested in hearing from either audience members or my academic colleagues on this matter, but it has often struck me that the portly newspaper editor with a pipe in this film resembles Kim Ki-young. Let me know later if you think my imagination is running away with itself. Kim Ki-young used to say that a good film contains the spirit of the era plus something. So it's appropriate to consider the time in which Iodo was made. By the late 1970s, the results of dictator Park Chung-hee's efforts to economically invigorate South Korea, to shake off the disastrous after effects of Japanese colonialism and the Korean War became tangible. That economic change, known as the Miracle on the Han River, saw huge corporations successfully push mass industrialisation. Despite some questionable government methods, including widespread oppression of the Korean people, living standards did start to rise. The film's fictional island is mainly populated by women, mostly oyster divers, and multiple mysterious shaman who live on the island. These women act as symbols of an unresolved pre-industrial past that frightens the contemporary men. There's not enough in Kim Ki-young's work to make a case for him having a feminist sensibility, but as a director, he knowingly channels his own masculine anxieties, widely shared by other South Korean men of the 1970s. Is part of Iodo's contemporary resonance because contemporary Korean men also experience anxiety and have been known to use Confucian ideals as a mask for their conservative beliefs? Or does the film have international resonance because anxiety about women is part of the male psyche? In a society of troubled men, it's not surprising that the women have problems of their own. In this film, women are depicted as having a primal hunger for procreation that terrifies the men. While the women of the island are the film's central focus, this desire to reproduce is clearly also present on the mainland. A brief encounter with the frontman's pregnancy-seeking wife at the beginning of the film is evidence of this. I'd like to direct your attention to the soundtrack similarities between that early scene's industrial environment and the percussion that accompanies the shaman's rituals. Do the Korean men and women share the same problem and not know it? I'll leave that for you to decide, because every time I watch this film, I change my mind about it. I'd also like to pose another question. At the time of the famous Busan International Film Festival retrospective on Kim Ki-young, scholar Choi Yun-jung wrote about the emphasis on red and blue in this film, representative of the sea and the phantoms that lie in wait for the fishermen of Parung Island. And this is less obvious to non-Korean speakers like myself, as the subtitles are not translated as Blue Island. The blues are probably as vivid as they ever were. Now, I've only just learned that we're looking at a 4K restoration today. I've only ever seen a 2K restoration, I believe. But judging from the publicity shots that circulate, because in the 2K restoration, there's a... right. Thanks for the technical assistance. The 2K restoration, the reds are a little faded. So they looked a little orange to my eye when I looked at the 2K restoration. But using Choi's work as a reference point, these two colours, red and blue, are in frequent use in the film. This use of red and blue prompts me to think about the taeguk at the centre of the South Korean flag. The taeguk is a symbol of harmony, but the reds and blues in this film are more contesting and competitive, aggressively so. So one is pushing out the other. Following the film's emphasis, and indeed the emphasis on men and women throughout Kim Ki-young's work, I wonder if the male energy of blue and the sea and the red imagery, particularly connected to the shaman, and the barmaid played by Lee Hua-shi, is a contest for harmony that can never be resolved to anyone's satisfaction. The fears and obsessions of the men and women of Iodo slowly converge in an unforgettable climax. That ultimately resulted in Iodo being censored by the Park Chung-hee government. I'm informed that the film only screened in South Korean cinemas for a few days when it was released in 1977, and that afterwards, distributors could not find theatres willing to screen it. Given the pre-democracy era's heavy censorship, I'm not sure what Kim Ki-young was thinking when he made this film. But in a society where all modernisation was in service of the president's glory, to make a film questioning such development was subversive in itself. To confront an audience schooled in Confucianism about the limits of patriarchy and the frightening power of women was to shake the foundations of the nation. It can be difficult to understand what drives an artist to challenge the powers that be and to film what might have been considered unfilmable. But we can only be grateful that Kim Ki-young did. The audacity of Kim Ki-young's film is a thing to be treasured. Although the film was heavily cut when released locally, fortunately for all of us, an uncut print was sent to Japan for distribution. Like most Korean directors of this era, Japan was significant for Kim Ki-young. As my research on this film, The Sea Knows, which I'll talk about later on today, my research indicates that Kim's work shows traces of Kobayashi Masaki, and as you will see in Iodo, there's also a smattering of Oshima Nagase, and I'd speculate Imamura Shohei. But despite these foreign inspirations, Kim Ki-young is as Korean as they come. Representing South Korea, Iodo was sent to the Berlin International Film Festival for its 28th edition in 1978. That was the first year that the Berlinale had reinvented itself as an end-of-winter event rather than a summer festival, a change that came with a robust response to censorship issues that challenged the festival in the years immediately prior. Included in that year of a revitalised Berlinale was a retrospective of banned German films, so no doubt Kim Ki-young's film would have added to the atmosphere of taboos being broken. And of course, Iodo has the honour of screening twice at Berlinale because in addition to 1978, it was after the landmark retrospective of Kim Ki-young's work at the second Busan International Film Festival, and after his and his wife's tragic death, that Iodo and 3 other Kim Ki-young films were screened in Berlin in 1998. For the record, those other Kim Ki-young films were, of course, The Housemaid, The Insect Woman, and Woman of Fire 82. When the idea of a book launch, conference, film screenings day was first floated, all the contributors, myself included, had an opinion on what films to screen. However, as this was the one film that was not really tackled in the book we are launching, it fills a certain gap for the contributors to watch Iodo with you here today. May this screening inspire more work on this film that Korean film scholar Darcy Paquette calls one of the best Korean films ever. Iodo continues to intrigue and inspire Korean filmmakers and can be seen as a forerunner to the grotesqueries of Park Chan-wook's The Handmaiden and Bong Joon-ho's Parasite. Through the support of these contemporary South Korean directors, the tireless efforts of the Korean Film Archive, And let me emphasise the hard work of Associate Professor Kim Chong Kang in her organising of both the book that she edited and also of her mounting this event. Thanks to all of them, the legacy of Kim Ki-young is available for us to ponder today. I hope you enjoy Yodo. I know you'll never forget it.
Good morning, everyone. So I would like to introduce director Kim Ki-young's one of early short films, I Am a Truck, which was presumably produced in probably between 1953 and 1954. The script that was submitted to the U.S. Information Agency was, it had marked as 1954. So I suspect it was released in 1954. Yeah. So Kim Ki-young was actually basically he was a theater person. During the Korean War, he went to Busan and he was introduced to this film scene by a very famous scriptwriter. I forgot the name. Oyoung-jin, sorry, Oyoung-jin, and he went to Korea's Office of Public Information to make this famous newsreel, Daehan News, all these newsreel issues, and then he was scouted to this U.S. Information Service in Korea. U.S. Information Service in Korea was a kind of a diplomatic agency that was stationed in South Korea to do certain publicity activities towards South Korean public, as well as they also did certain intelligence work, especially during the Korean War and after the Korean War, during the Reconstruction period. So they also started making newsreel series during the Korean War, which was titled Liberty News. Actually, they had this long history of making newsreel series since the occupation of South Korea after the defeat of the Japanese imperial government. So this newsreel series was very much the title product of this new film studios launched by this U.S. Information Service in South Korea in Sangnam, which is part of Changwon currently in South Korea, and that was a huge film studios with lots of equipment and very big film library. So Kim Ki-young was scouted to make this newsreel series as well as some educational documentaries. So we can suspect that he was regarded as very promising filmmaker at the time, and at the same time he was also very enthusiastic film geek or some film maniac. So we can suspect that he almost I think watched all the films housed in that library of the USIS. Covering all the monumental films ranging from the battleship Potemkin through all the new films in the 1940s and 50s. So he was very much of an early adopter of the film styles and film aesthetics at the time. So this film is following this the trend of World War II documentaries, especially in the United States, which was aiming to educate, especially young children, the roles of military vehicles at the time. And the military vehicle was very important in the United States because the vehicle industry was rising at the time. I mean, the war itself was kind of the opportunity for American car industry to improve their own enterprise world. So jeeps and trucks were described as kind of talking objects, like talking jeeps and talking trucks. They were published in literature, children's literature and films. So one of the famous films was an autobiography of a jeep, which was made by the U.S. Army Office of War Information, presumably in 1943. And that has a very bright and very humorous tone, showing this very what can I say, youthful and very powerful role of military vehicle jeep. But this version, this Korean version of talking vehicle, talking truck made by Kim Ki-young was completely different, as you might see from the screen. It has gloomy, grim, or grotesque depiction of this talking vehicle with certain narratives of very much of a horror genre, showing certain narratives of these assembled bodies, and very much of Kim Ki-young's signature styles like high contrast lighting and irritating sounds and radical angles. I was able to interview the cinematographer Kim Hyung-gun in 2012 in Chicago at his home, and he said that they did not actually had any kind of what can I say, direction from the USIS to make this film like this. It was Kim Ki-young's own decision to make this film like this, and they went to this factory, and Kim Hyung-gun had to climb up to a shelf of the machine and all this, equipment to make this high-angle view. So that was completely Kim Ki-young's own decision, and I think that was a kind of an outcome made by this person who was struggling in a propaganda agency of a foreign country, at the center of this Cold War conflict. So please enjoy watching this film.
자, 이제 영화를 시작하도록 하겠습니다. We are going to screen this two-bus armor truck, and it will be continued with Your Island. Thank you.
Okay, we need to begin our academic conference. So if you hang around the room, you please come to and take a seat. And then I guess you are ready for enjoying this great academic conference. So please come in. Yes, we need a little bit hurry.
오케이. 예. 자, 로비에 계신 분들은 이제 장내로 들어와 주시기 바랍니다. 예, 저희가 시간을 좀 아껴야 할 필요가 있습니다. 자, 예. 예, 이제 들어오고 계시군요. 오케이. 자, 그러면 이제 제가 이제 한국말로 했는데요. 이제 그 영어로 된 학술대회니까 이 모두 전화해서 영어로 진행을 하겠습니다. Okay. Thanks for coming to this great academic conference. And then today we will have the academic conference on the Kim Gi-young's film. And today it is the pleasure to have Kim Gi-young's offspring. So his the son and daughter come here to share their memory with Kim Gi-young. So please stand up, Miss Kim Young-mi, the daughter of Kim Gi-young. Yes. Yes. Okay. We have 90 minutes for a presentation. So in the compressed situation, we need to save time. So each presenter just have a 10 minutes. Next presenter come here and then change it. And then if you have any, for audience, if you have any comment or question, hold your comment and question. We will deal with your question and comment in the round table session. That will begin after the screening of 반금량. That will be 5:30 p.m. to 6 p.m. Or you can just use break time. We will have a 20-minute break time after the session and between this session and the screening of 반진예. So you go out lobby and then you can ask your personal question to each presenter. Get it? Yes. Okay. So I will turn to this opportunity for our first presenter, Kim Cheong-gang, the Associate Professor of Hanyang University. By the way, my name is Hwang No. I'm a moderator of this academic conference today. Okay, please give the clap to our.
Thank you very much, Bruno. So since we don't really have time, I'll just go ahead and start my presentation. The title of my presentation, Kim Gi-young, the first global South Korean author. And of course, Kim Gi-young was not the first director who was awarded in the international film festivals. However, it is very difficult how much actual global attention is given to one single Korean director as much as Kim Gi-young, who were rediscovered in the late 1990s, South Korea. So you will, as a kind of editor, I'll just frame today's presentation. So you will hear the stories of how he was rediscovered from Jason after my presentation. And to talk about a little bit about Kim Gi-young's film, Kim Gi-young's film rendered entirely unique within the wider context of South Korean cinema. His oeuvre covers the changing trajectories of modern Korean history, a path shaped by the numerous layers of tumultuous transnational history experience. So, there was a colonial occupation in Korea and Korean War and 30 years of military dictatorship. So Kim Gi-young sensitively observed these historical changes and observed their experience, and this process inspired him to express a range of related complicated concepts, perspectives, and psychological ideas in his cinema, the significance of which cannot be neatly narrated in one simple formula. So his films uncover the intense element of hybridity and transnationality that stretched beyond the immediate moment of national time and space depicted within the cinematic frame. So this is his like a handwriting, and whenever I see this handwriting, it's really cosmopolitan, so I thought this is a really nice photo. So for this reason, a useful understanding of director's life and oeuvre cannot be maintained within a simple national-oriented perspective, and transnational and cosmopolitan perhaps offer better keywords to frame an analysis of his works. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about his life, the life of Kim Ki-young. Born into an upper middle class family in Seoul, his father, Kim Seok-jin, was a school teacher. And when his father was transferred to Pyongyang, he moved there and attended Pyongyang High School. And thanks to the progressive mood in Pyongyang High School, Kim Ki-young left the institution fully imbued with the appreciation for modern art and culture. However, he did not immediately pursue a career in arts. Instead, he decided to become a doctor, and he studied at Gyeongsang Dentist School about 2 years. Then he had a chance to go to Japan in the middle of the Asian Pacific War. Later, Kim recounted that this experience living in Japan as a young man became a fundamental force and that developed his love for art. His candid expression of love for Japanese culture continued even after Korean liberation in 1945, a moment whose most other intellectuals and artists hurriedly denied their connections to Japanese colonial time in response to this fervent nationalism that was sweeping the country in post-colonial Korea. And Kim Ki-young's film career, however, started born under the heavy American influence at the very slide not yet. So Kim Ki-young's film career nonetheless were born under the heavy American influence at the very onset of the Cold War. After country's liberation from Japan, Kim Ki-young came back to Korea and entered the medical school of Seoul National University. However, his interest in art made him to join student theatrical group, the National University Theater at SNU, where he met his lifelong companion, financial supporter, and wife, Kim Yoo-gong. So here is the, I heard that this is a wedding photo of them. And within this group, he served as a stage director up until the outbreak of the Korean War in 1950. So during the war, he happened to meet an acquaintance from the high school, a playwright Oh Young-jin, who advised him to make newsreels for United States Information Service. Through USIS, Kim began his directorial career by making several small documentary productions, that one of which we watch today. So Kim's early documentary films, such as I Am a Truck and anti-narrative productions, Boxes of Death, demonstrate how even his earlier endeavors in cinema were apparently marked by various stylistic experiments, a hybrid approach Kim learned by combining various trends he had seen within international cinema. This interesting story will be presented by Professor Han-sang Kim today. And in the 1960s and 70s, South Korea was governed under dictatorship led by Park Chung-hee, and who swept the political power through military coup in 1961. And in 1972, Park Chung-hee further intensified his dictatorial reach, implementing so-called Yushin system. So this totalitarian system was designed to regulate the entire body of South Korean society. Given this restrictive legal environment and the wider repressive social mood of 1960s and 70s, it's incredibly surprising that Kim Ki-young's films of this period were able to display their notable excess of sexual content and aesthetics focus on grotesque. So perhaps Kim Ki-young's most renowned films are those of the Housemaid series, Woman film, which were primarily produced during this repressive period of military rule. This series consists of the productions The Housemaid, Woman of Fire, Insect Woman, and Carnivorous Animals. In these works, he repeats similar narrative structures. A housemaid is inserted into a stable middle-class family and proceeds to finally destroy everyone, including herself. So the conventions of female and male iconography and the norm in many 1960s and 70s Korean films breaks down in these films. The unusual, transgressive nature of Kim's outfit also included representing people with physical disabilities, marginalized sexual identities, along with taboo subjects like parricide, cannibalism, and necrophilia, which we saw in Eel Island. So perhaps the director's interest in Freudian psychology and his experience as a doctor imbibed his artistic perspective with a complicated understanding of human body and mind. His interest in providing this descriptive analytical commentary intensified in later productions such as Eel Island, Water Lady, 수녀, Numi, and other films. Such films provoked audiences of the time to rethink the social norms set up within a country in which the field of biopolitics was controlled by brutal draconian regime. We'll hear more interesting stories about these films by our authors Steve Choi, Soyoung Kim, and Ariel Shunson. So even in these films that strays from this frequent interest, Kim's works can be still seen to consistently reflect his wider idiosyncratic aesthetic and conceptual concerns. The representations and portrayal of traditional Korean society in a grotesque rather than a sentimental or celebratory manner is another of his repeated interests. This can be seen in the films such as 고려장 and Kim's historical films such as The Sea Knows tragically represent the colonial and post-colonial past of Korea while still displaying the director's unique aesthetic concerns and his unbiased transnational perspective of national history. We will hear about this interesting two interpretations of these two films by Professor Kim Kyu-hyun and Russell Edwards today. And final significant aspect of his oeuvre is the relative independence he maintained in his filmmaking practice. In answering a question about how he would like to be known among the younger film audience prior to his landmark retrospective at the second Busan International Film Festival in 1997, Kim replied that he wanted to be remembered as the father of independent film, rather than as a simply cult director. So while the unique manner of his output has always been justifiable central to any discussions of his work, it is equally significant that his films were created through an independent.
Our next presenter is Jason Meshabace. So you can come here. Please sit here. And then he will present about the rediscovering Kim Ki-young, the rise of the South Korean author on the film festival circuit. Okay. Okay. By the way, I will give you the sign. We have 1 minute. Yeah. When we have 1 minute, I will give you the sign.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Just want to quickly thank Professor Kim Jong-gan and Kim Hong-jun for giving me this opportunity to speak at the Korean Film Archive on the work of Kim Ki-young. So as you can see, the title of my paper today is Rediscovering Kim Ki-young, the Rise of the South Korean Auteur on the Film Festival Circuit. I've broken this down into 3 different sections, begin looking at the film festival, Busan Film Festival retrospective, the Kim Ki-young retrospective, then moving on to the film festival circuit and its relationship to the auteur, before concluding with looking at the Korean auteur and the festival circuit. So, as has been mentioned a couple of times today already, in 1997, this is the second year of the Busan International Film Festival, it curated a retrospective of Kim's work, screening 8 of his films, some of his most iconic works, including The Housemaid, Insect Woman, and Killer Butterfly. Busan is known for its discoveries. We've seen that over the years. Films including, more recently, House of Hummingbird, and I, as a film critic, attend Busan each year looking for new filmmakers, new discoveries, new auteurs. But I think with the retrospectives, it's been very useful to kind of go back in time and rediscover other directors. And that's certainly true for Kim Ki-young, and that was put together in collaboration with the Korean Film Archive. And I think, in the late 1990s or the 1990s, Kim's work was somewhat being forgotten. So it was a good opportunity for him and good opportunity for programmers and critics to rediscover some of his work. Now, the reaction in Busan to Kim's films was of great significance, I would argue. Chris Berry wrote a fascinating essay titled Introducing Mr. Monster, Kim Ki-young and the Critical Economy of the Globalized Art House Cinema. And he states in that the heat has been generated by the PIF retrospective, it was called Busan then, the likes of which I have not seen before around Korean cinema. So there was this kind of feverish reaction to his films. And James Havis Richard titled an article, A Star is Born, aged 78. He argued the new discovery at this year's festival was not to be found in the new current section, but rather instead it was the name of a 78-year-old Kim Ki-young. Now, if we look at what film festivals are, I think many of you would perhaps agree that it is indeed a Western construct. Julian Stringer argues it's necessary to understand the core observation that the film festival is originally a European phenomenon. It's a creature of the European region that went global. So looking back at the first film festivals, we have the big three in Europe, of course. Venice began in 1932, we have Berlin, and then of course Cannes. And Cannes is arguably one of the leading festivals in the world, not just in Europe. And there's been a focus on the auteur, and that ultimately began with the Cannes Film Festival, with the Directors' Fortnight sidebar that was created in the late 1960s. There was a lot of changes happening in France during that time. There were lots of strikes, protesting against the government, and the festival too wanted to be free from political constraints. And so they turned their attention to curating the festival around the auteur. And it also coincided with, I guess, a movement of writers in the 1950s and 60s, led by André Bazin, who wrote quite extensively about the auteur and also mise en scène. And so there is a close relationship between festivals and auteur cinema. I'm oversimplifying here because I don't have a lot of time. But yeah, there were lots of changes that happened during the 20th century, and it also intensified in the early 1990s and culminated with the emergence of the so-called Cannes film, which paved the way for what we now call the festival film. So a film that travels across the festival circuit, sometimes beginning in Europe and traveling across the world, here in Asia, so films premiering in Cannes often come to the Busan Film Festival, and vice versa as well. Films premiering in Busan will then make their way to places like Berlin and Rotterdam. And so, Venice and Berlin followed Cannes' lead in showcasing auteur cinema, though of course with different tastes. And there's been a focus, like I said, on the discoveries. That's true of many film festivals throughout the world, Sundance, and of course here in Busan as well. And there's also a link between film festivals and national cinemas. So Cannes, there's a big emphasis on French national cinema, and unsurprisingly in Busan as well. I mean, it was launched in the mid to late 1990s, together with Jeonju and Bucheon, and the rise of those festivals correlates with the rise of the Korean film industry. So interestingly, the local reaction to the Kim retrospective was actually a muted one. Critic Lee Dong-jing argued the popularity of Kim's films to the Western professionals conversely reflects that we don't have a representative Korean auteur available to show to the global market. But go flash forward a few years, we have Park Chan-wook, Bong Joon-ho, Kim Ji-yoon. And so I think if you look at the reaction to what was going on at the Busan Film Festival in the late 1990s, a similar reaction on a bigger scale was happening with following the screening of films like Old Boy, Memories of Murder, Tale of Two Sisters. And various impressions of Kim Ki-young's excess, there's a lot of adjectives used around Kim Ki-young's work, but excess and The striking mise-en-scène echoes, I would argue, the importance that Bazin placed on the auteur. Berry concluded his essay by stating, "We may not find that Kim Ki-young, the maverick Mr. Monster, comes to signify Koreanness." And so, looking at the work of Park Chang-wook or Bong Joon-ho and Kim Ji-yoon, I think one of the things that I find fascinating about their work is the way they convey and tackle the complexities of Korean history, Korean culture, Korean society. You could argue they look at Koreanness in really wild and innovative ways. And you could argue that that was one of the factors behind the success of Park Chan-wook's award-winning Old Boy. I remember very well the reaction to that, reading in newspapers the grotesque scenes. And you've got Bong Joon-ho's Parasite, of course, and the reaction to that, and Kim Ji-yoon's A Tale of Two Sisters. And in an interview about Kim Ki-young's legacy, this was on the DVD or Blu-ray of Housemaid, Kim Ji-yoon said some of the cinematic DNA was passed on to the next generation. I've got a still here from well, it's the only still I could find from Cobweb. I haven't seen the film, but Song Kang-ho plays the director in the 1970s, and it appears to imitate somewhat Kim Ki-young. So I think it fits quite well into my presentation. And so you've got a director like Kim Ki-young premiering at the Cannes Film Festival, not unlike other directors that have come before him. So yeah, there's an interesting relationship between cult, popular and art cinema. I think Mark Raymond wrote a fascinating essay looking at the Korean directors and Korean auteurs on the festival circuit, looking at films like Old Boy and many others. And he talks about this relationship between cult, popular and art cinema. And I think this is where Korean auteurs have thrived on the festival circuit. So looking at the success of Park Chan-wook as well, his films have been kind of labelled Asia Extreme. Some see that as a problematic label. But I think the kind of the reaction to it and the reception to his films, I think in some ways correlate to what happened with Kim Ki-young at the Busan retrospective in the late 1990s. And also I think this was a consequence as well of what the changes that were happening in the film industry, the local Korean film industry. There were lots of new producers entering the scene during the 1990s, changes to the way films were financed, and various other measures that led to the birth of so-called, the new Korean cinema directors. But I think, Kim Ki-young's work came significantly before these directors, and I think the reaction to them, the reaction to those films kind of preceded what would happen much later. Thank you.
Okay. Wow, great. Okay. Our next presenter is Kim Han-sang. Yes, Kim Han-sang will present his paper about Kim Ki-young at the intersection of Cold War Alliance, national reconstruction, and artistic impulse.
So I also would like to express my gratitude to Professor Kim Chong-gang and Director Kim Hong-jun for this great opportunity to share my thoughts about Director Kim Ki-young and his early films. So today I will talk about this early years of Kim Ki-young in USIS, U.S. Information Service in Korea. And what I want to say with this presentation is that his authorship, authorship, which will be very much emphasized probably today in today's conference as a whole, and in the book, is not a thing that came out from his individual geniusness, that emerges from vacuum-like condition, but it was something that came out from very entangled, historical and geopolitical conditions, and that was pretty much of an outcome of this conflict of lots of different elements, factors that situated Kim Ki-young in this in nurturing his own artistic impulse. So that was what I wanted to emphasize. And so Kim Ki-young is like a face of a South Korean national cinema, if we can say there is something like South Korean national cinema. But actually, the term South Korean national cinema itself is very, you know, can I say, it's self-ironic, right? South Korea itself is not, you know, quite a complete nationhood, right? I mean, there's North Korea, something irritating, as a you know, something recurring and continuously coming to us as the same or as the other, right? And at the same time, we also have this history of colonialization, and in the history of Korean cinema, there are you know, ethnic Korean cinema made during the colonial period by ethnic Korean filmmakers or ethnic Korean actors and actresses with Korean language. But how can we define them? They are some people say that they are Korean cinema or 한국영화, but you know, obviously they are not South Korean cinema. So it's very hard to define what national cinema is, and to look at this term of national cinema, we also need to see how the agents of those that field, the national cinema itself, you know, acted during the time that this national cinema emerged at the time, especially the period of so-called nation building. Yeah. So Kim Ki-young was hired by USIS. He was an employee of USIS, but before Kim Ki-young, there was a period of contracting system. So there is a very interesting episode of these contractor filmmakers who were actually the very what can I say, well trained filmmakers who already had these skills and techniques during the colonial period, and then who were hired as contractors by USIS or before the US military government. So they wanted to land the USIS own film studio in Jinhae for the post-production of a South Korean Rock Army film called An Assault of Justice, 정의의 진격. But they remembered that the U.S. Army officer refused to land this studio. So that was the thing that these filmmakers are remembering. But this officer himself, whose name was William Ridgway, says that in an interview says that these 6 filmmakers were very anxious about the new facility USIS imported from the US, because this new facility could make them in vulnerable position, because these new facilities were highly convenient to use. So their techniques were not quite needed, right? And they could be situated in a less not quite good position in negotiating with USIS for their own wage. So they have different memories about the position of these South Korean filmmakers. I think this prehistory of USIS before Kim Ki-young is very important because it shows how these South Korean filmmakers at the moment of nation building and how Kim Ki-young's own authorship emerged in this very entangled and complex situation. So USIS Korea was an educator. Okay. It was an educator as well as a very good resource for South Korean filmmakers. It had very good acumen and rivals, as I said in the introduction of I Am a Truck. So as you could see, Kim Ki-young's early films, short films, documentaries, they show lots of influence from American propaganda films. But as you could see, Kim Ki-young tweaked a lot. He kind of twisted and made his own signatures in it, and he also changed it very bright and humorous nature of American propaganda films into gloomy and grim and grotesque version of USIS Korea films. And Boxes of Death was the first feature-length film made by Kim Ki-young himself as well as the USIS Korea. USIS Korea actually did not make any of this kind, any other films of this kind after this film that was released in a commercial market. So Kim Ki-young's debut film was quite a unique one. And this film shows various influence from diverse sources like Hollywood conventions, expressionist elements, and stylistic influence of Italian neorealism and the remnants of Japanese colonialism. And it also reflects the geopolitical recognition as an anti-communist propaganda film. But Kim Ki-young, I think, very much showed through this series of films very much of his own entangled position as an individual who struggled in this foreign agency that promoted the ideal of American ways of life and the ways of block building. So he was an speaker for America as a block builder, but at the same time he had this recognition as a nation builder of South Korean film industry, and he was also an early adopter or film buff or film geek who was exposed to American film styles and world film aesthetics, and at the same time he was an auteur. I mean, I don't want to emphasize this concept very much, but he, I think, very self-consciously made himself as an auteur who challenged certain conventions and mainstream styles that was posed to him by Hollywood movies and American propaganda films. So this hybridity in subject formation of South Korean national cinema is very much emphasized, I think, in looking at Kim's own trajectory and his own so-called authorship. Thank you.
남자 주인공은 자기 아버지를 죽였어요. 아버지 죽인 이유가 뭐냐? 아버지가 그 고려장교에 반대를 하는 거야. 자기 엄마가 너무 좋아서. 그래서 싸우다가 옆집으로 쏴 죽여버려. 그런 다음에는 사람들한테는 이 아버지가 사냥 가서 죽었다고 거짓말을 치는 거예요. 근데 이런 거를 보고 있으면 제가 어떤 생각이 드냐면은 저는 이제 역사학자이기 때문에 1930년대, 40년대 청춘 시대를 보냈던 일본의 세대가 10년대, 20년대에 좀 더 자유주의적이고 코스모폴리탄한 교육을 받았던 세대를 보고 북풍이 막 차오르면서 세계의 지금 반을 우리가 지배하고 있는데 무슨 놈의 그런 아직도 인권 얘기하고 자빠졌냐 이런 식으로 그 세대를 욕했던 그 모습이 떠올라요. 그러다가 패전하니까 어떻게 됐죠? 다시 또 그런 세대를 다시 살아야 되죠. 그 모순점이 같이 가지고 살아야 되는 거예요. 김기영 감독도 마찬가지예요. 구룡이 보면은 그 구룡이 벌써 자기의 첫 번째 아내를 갖다가 죽이는데 가담을 하고, 그 다음에 간난이의 그 어린 딸이 그 뭐야 그러나 그 4.19 세대의 그런 표상이라고 해석할 수도 있는데, 그런 걸 그한테 다 가담을 했기 때문에 자기 자신이 결코 죄가 없는 사람이 아니고 그거를 절실하게 인식을 하고 있고, 그런 의식이 그 폭발적인 클라이맥스에 비가 내리고 천둥 번개가 치고 그냥 거목을 도끼를 찍어버리는 그 폭력적인 발현에 그거를 끌어가는 그 이유가 되고 있다. 저는 그렇게 생각을 하는 겁니다. 그렇기 때문에 그런 이런 캐릭터들이 영화 내내 추정하는 모순적 감정, 고통과 카타르시스가 결코 그런 신화적인 과거의 세계에 한국인이나 조선 일본인들이 경험했던 것이 아니라 당시대 1960년대, 1980년대 살았던 우리 근대 주체들의 관객들과 영화를 만든 사람들의 의식을 반영하고 있다. 그거를 아주 깊이 비수처럼 찌르는 영화들이다. 그렇기 때문에 이 세상이 이 그때 상황이 만들어 놓은 상황에서 우리가 초국학을 넘어서지기 전까지는 이 영화들은 계속 부부의 명작으로 존재할 것이다. 생각합니다. 예, 감사합니다.
It seems that the Professor Kim has a lot of things to talk about. So let's deal with his idea during our roundtable session. Okay. Next presenter is the Russell Edward from the RMIT University, and then Love Thy Enemy, Kim Gi-young's exploration of Korean-Japanese romance in the cinema. Okay, good. Dr. Russell.
Like many admirers of Korean cinema, I've spent hours and hours gratefully moving through the Korean Film Archive's YouTube channel, trying to expand my horizons. Around the time I discovered Kim Ki-young's The Sea Knows, I was also researching more recent South Korean films like The Age of Shadows and The Battleship Island that touch on Japan's colonisation of the Korean Peninsula. The more contemporary films that I compared it to, the more I appreciated how unusual this Kim Ki-young film was. For those who've not seen the film, The Sea Knows is the story of Arun, a Korean conscript in the Imperial Army in the Japanese city of Nagoya. The film is usually remembered for the brutal bullying the private receives from his Japanese commanding officer. Famously, the Korean soldier is forced to lick feces off the officer's boot. But it is the romance at the film's centre and how that overlaps with the Korean experience of Japan that interests me most. Made in 1961, the same year as The Housemaid, The Sea Knows, as a romantic melodrama, represents the stylistic road of realism that Kim Ki-young declined to take. 1961 also places The Sea Knows as being released between the overthrow of the Ri Sung-min government and the ascendancy of Park Chung-hee. Upon the film's release, most ticket buyers would have had living memory of Japanese occupation. All of the paying audience would have had vivid memories of the Korean War that ended 8 years before. The 1965 normalisation of South Korean relations with Japan was still 4 years in the future. It was a brief period where there was freedom to explore vigorous debate about the future, but there were still controls on what could and couldn't be done. There were, for example, bans on Japanese language and the employment of Japanese actors. Kim's use of actress Gong Midori for the love interest Hideko enabled the director to sidestep the era's Waisek controversy about the representations of Japan in South Korean and Hollywood films that was hotly debated by the Korean Film Producers Association and the Ministry of Culture. While The Sea Knows is set in Japan, it was shot in South Korea. However, Kim and his cinematographer Jong Il-sung did travel to Nagoya to film location establishing inserts. This, however, does not account for the presence of a Japanese film within The Sea Knows, which the lead characters attend. The shots are very dark, but the film appears too authentic to be a facsimile. However, even in the freedom of the post-Ri era, inclusion of footage from an actual Japanese film would be a daring skirting of established restrictions. If anyone here knows anything about this film within a film, I'd be keen to hear about it. But let's get back to The Sea Knows interracial romance between a Korean soldier and a Japanese woman. This was and remains a rarity. Among the few exceptions are the colonial era film You and I, which positions a Japanese bride as a post-war reward for a Korean man's service in the Imperial Army, More Korean-Japanese on-screen relationships appeared in the decade following the See No's, but typically the relationships did not survive the film's duration. For example, The Daughter of Governor General ends with the execution of the Korean lover of the titular Japanese heroine. This tendency has continued in contemporary South Korean films. The biopic Anarchist from Colony depicts a consummated romance between a Korean man and a Japanese woman, and in that film the Japanese lover dies. So given that fatalistic trend, Arun's and Hidiko's relationship in the See No's is all the more surprising for the way that it survives all obstacles, albeit battered and bruised, but it does survive. The romance is triggered by a Japanese soldier named Nakamura, who takes the Korean soldier to his family's house, where Arun meets Nakamura's sister, and more importantly, Nakamura's niece Hideko. Before Hideko appears, Arun is already intellectually intrigued by her book collection, but their first encounter does not go well. Casually, Hideko criticises local Koreans and is reprimanded by her uncle, who points out that their guest is Korean. Hideko apologises and makes her exit. As she leaves, Kim Ki-young cuts to a shot of Hideko, of the chastened Hideko, giving her a degree of agency that is equal to Arun. Hideko's agency is clearly foreshadowed by the fact that the actress, Gong Midori, is given higher billing than lead actor Kim Eun-ha. As the film moves along, Hideko redeems herself by modifying her view of Koreans, and the romance blossoms. Mostly Arun remains a passive receptacle of Hideko's affections, which raises questions about who an audience is being asked to identify with. But just as Hideko progresses beyond her prejudice against Koreans, she also challenges Arun to face his prejudices. During a disagreement, Arun exclaims he hates Japan. Hideko retorts, "I'm not Japan, I'm a woman called Hideko." The film is not naive about the colonial past. The See No's has enough despicable Japanese villains to avoid being interpreted as an apology for Japan. Given that Japanese villainy is offset by positive Japanese representations, both female and male, it seems that South Korean audiences are being asked to differentiate between the Japanese who oppressed them during the colonial era and other Japanese who accept Koreans as equals. Certainly the film holds no implied criticism of the couple's union. The See No's also suggest that Koreans too must be taken on a case-by-case basis. In an effort to break up the relationship, a senior Japanese soldier arranges for Arun to receive a female Korean visitor. Having known Gyung-hee since she was a child, Arun naively takes Gyung-hee to visit Hideko and her mother at their house. This particular scene is one in which the film print has a damaged soundtrack, so present-day viewers of the film are unable to fully know what occurred. However, I learned that there had been 2 volumes of Kim Ki-young's scripts published by the Korean Film Archive, including a shooting script of the See No's. As the book was published in 2008, this was not such a big deal for Korean-speaking film fans, but for the rest of us, this was a major revelation. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Song Won-jung for her translation. As intended by the Japanese military, Hideko misconstrues the nature of Arun's relationship with Gyung-hee. With some relief, Hideko's mother also assumes that Arun has a romantic history with Gyung-hee, but Arun confounds all of the women by leaving for a hotel where he can sleep alone. According to the shooting script, this section without a soundtrack leaves Gyung-hee and Hideko sitting on a bed discussing Arun's departure. Primly, Gyung-hee declares that following a man to an inn is not something an educated lady would do. Hideko replies, education always requires sacrifice, and announces her departure. In the shooting script, the descriptive text at the scene's end says, Hideko leaves the room. Notably, in the available print, this scene cuts directly from the 2 rivals sitting on the bed to the image of US fighter planes under attack. The described action of Hideko leaving the room is omitted. Due to the lack of sound, it cannot be confirmed whether or not Kim filmed the discussion between Hideko and Gyung-hee exactly as it is written. However, as this shooting script is the best existing record of Kim's intention for this scene, it can be concluded that Hideko does join Arun at the inn afterwards, even if her departure is not betrayed. The significance of this is not immediately apparent. Her mission unsuccessful, Gyung-hee disappears from the narrative completely. Hideko also disappears for approximately 20 minutes. Diegetically, Hideko's return occurs several weeks later. Her reappearance moves the narrative into its final act when Arun receives word that Hideko is pregnant. Arun urgently returns to Hideko, and Hideko suggests that they must run away from the Japanese army to the countryside. By contrast, Arun says, I still want to be a great Japanese soldier for Hideko-san. This exchange places South Korean audiences in a bind, as it sympathetically depicts a Korean man declaring loyalty to the Japanese army. There's insufficient time to address the film's amazing climax in detail, but suffice to say that even until the very end of the film, Japanese soldiers remain a physical threat to both halves of the couple. Again, I stress how the C-Nose does not romanticise the Japanese colonisers, but the film's ending does speak to a wider anti-war sentiment. I suggest that while diegetically all of the film's action takes place in Japan, the then recent Korean experience of civil war and corrupt government is a valuable prism through which to view this final sequence. As said earlier, the C-Nose was released just after the Rhee presidency was overthrown. The C-Nose final sequence dramatises the collapse of Japanese authority as civilians wishing to be reunited with their loved ones storm the fence and rush to the pile of bodies set to be burned. Although the C-Nose focuses on the Pacific War, this final sequence also encourages reflection on the death toll of the more recent war experienced by South Koreans. I acknowledge that local support for anti-war sentiment did not flourish in South Korea until the early 1970s, but I argue that the parallels between the C-Nose climax and South Korea's experience of civil war are too important to ignore. Of all the bodies, only Arun, supported by Hideko, and you see on the left-hand side, that side of the screen, only they seem to have survived. The reunited couple take up a small portion of the screen dominated by trauma. Although not a joyous ending, their reunion offers a thin sliver of hope. The film's audience are left to conclude that such scenes must not be allowed to happen again, whether caused by Japanese or Koreans. Thus, Hideko's earlier statement, "I'm not Japan," comes back with a greater significance. The identification with the former enemy is a powerful moment in a national cinema. The C-Nose is not a film, I think, that could be made in South Korea today. In terms of South Korea's still unresolved conflict with Japan, Kim Ki-young's film still remains on the wrong side of history. There are many obstacles, but if Japan and South Korea are ever able to come to equal and mutually satisfying terms with the comfort women issue, Dr. Takashima territorial issues, then Kim Ki-young's The C-Nose may eventually be redeemed in the eyes of South Korean audiences. Thank you.
Okay, our next presenter is the Dr. Soyeon Kim. She will present about refiguring the housemaids of the singularity from dualism to triadism based on the Lacanian perspective. Okay.
안녕하세요. 잘 못하는 영어지만 한번 읽어보겠습니다. 제목은 여기 써 있는 것과 같고요. 저는 이제 다른 그 시각 자료는 준비를 못했어요. 그러나 제가 발표하는 내용이 굉장히 잘 요약되어 있기 때문에 대충 영어를 들으셔도 됩니다. Most criticisms have approached the housemaid through a dualistic lens, analyzing the contrasting elements such as the wife versus the housemaid, the first floor versus the second floor, the straight lines versus the roundish lines, modernity versus pre-modernity, and love versus lust, and more. However, it is arguable that this prevailing binary approach can fully capture the originality of the film. Instead, I propose adapting Lacan's ontological triad, which encompasses the symbolic, the imaginary, and the real. Simply put, the symbolic is the structured reality governed by language and law. However, it could be undermined by the real, which exists outside language and beyond the symbolic order, representing the lack or excess of the symbolic. When the fissure of reality is open, the real, or the foreclosed and repressed, intrudes into reality and reveals the underlying antagonisms between classes, genders, nations, and so on. Reality is constructed by suturing the real, making it more of an imagined fantasy than an objective world. Lacan elucidates that the fictitious is precisely what I call the symbolic, wherein the term fictitiousness highlights the topological nature of the imaginary. Therefore, the text could be interpreted applying the tripartite framework. The characters in the film inhabit a pre-modern reality, but envision it as modern, yet their constructed fantasy reality is persistently disrupted by the intrusion of an undefinable X. The interplay among pre-modernity, modernity, and the enigmatic X forms a complex battleground, with the presence of X propelling modernity toward its ultimate crisis. The film exhibits numerous examples of the triadic relationships, evident in the narrative structure, the status of characters, including animals, the hierarchical dynamics between seeing and being seen, and its visual style. Firstly, the housemaid is composed of three narrative layers. The first layer revolves around the wife's nightmare of rats dying on a plate. The second layer delves into the story of adultery, while the third layer unfolds in the epilogue, where the husband dismisses the entire affair as nonsensical, directly addressing the audience. It is crucial to pay attention to the wife's nightmare, particularly the unsettling presence of human-faced rats. Whose faces do they represent? Perhaps they might be Kyung-hee and the housemaid intruding into the family's modern home. The dream scene serves as a revelation of her unconscious anxiety triggered by the presence of the other women from the outside world. However, neither the wife nor the husband displays any curiosity regarding this enigmatic dream, and the mystery remains unresolved until her husband's adulterous affair is successfully signified as absurd nonsense. In this context, the three layers of narrative can be aligned with the triadic logic of Lacanian ontology. The prologue and epilogue situations represent the family's symbolic reality, intertwined with their imagination of future prosperity, but ultimately undermined by the unconscious desires and anxieties that emanate from the dimension of the real. Secondly, the characters can also be classified in a triadic manner. There are two distinct categories of women in relation to Dong-sik. The first consists of his wife, Sun-young, and Hyung-mi, who hold positions protected in the society. In order to safeguard his social standing, Dong-sik should be careful about controlling his sexual desire to these women. The topological status of the first group is aligned with the symbolic, as the symbolic order relies on the interplay between the universal and the exceptional, Sun-young and Hyung-mi. On the other hand, the housemaid, being socially marginalized and employed by Dong-sik himself, makes the other category, corresponding to the real. The four women 이거 제가 잘못 건드렸어요. 네. Makes the other category corresponding to the real. The four women carry their own expectations regarding their relationship with Dong-sik, yet their hopes are not fulfilled due to Dong-sik's vulnerability to the disruptive force of the real. The children can also be differentiated in a triadic way. The rivalry between the son Sang-sun and the daughter Ae-sun can be understood as reflecting the tension between the universality and exceptionality within the symbolic order. Meanwhile, the opposition between the three siblings from the wife and the aborted baby from the housemaid introduces a different dynamic into the narrative. The nameless and genderless aborted baby's inability to signify itself within the established symbolic highlights its connection to the real. It is worth noting that there are three kinds of rats, G, in the film: living ones, dead ones, and the squirrel, 다람쥐 in Korean. Living rats, with their untraceable and potentially dangerous nature, embody the realm of the real. They disrupt the fantasy of a sweet home in a newly built Western-style house. Yet, once captured and killed, their topological position shifts from the real to the symbolic. In contrast, the squirrel, commonly perceived as cute and adorable, represents the imaginary nature to counteract the filthy and menacing rats. The ontological status of rats is effectively conveyed through the economy of island exchange. Throughout the film, it is ultimately the rats not the housemaid, who are able to oversee what is going on in the house. The shots depicting the wife or the housemaid looking inside the cupboard seem to be presented as objective. But when a rat suddenly jumps out of the cupboard, it becomes apparent that the previous shot was designed from the rat's subjective point of view. Nevertheless, the observation of the rat cannot be attributed to a specific point of view, while the perspective of the housemaid can be discerned. Drawing upon Lacan's differentiation between conscious look and unconscious gaze, the rat's observation aligns with gaze, while the housemaid's peering aligns with look. Without the presence of rats, the allegorical world of the housemaid would become totalized and contained. The film's visual style incorporates triadic elements, featuring patterns with straight lines or circular shapes and anamorphic visuals that create uncertainty in the mise-en-scène, such as hazy smoke from cigarettes and flowing rainwater over window. Geometrical patterns with straight lines are seen in costumes, architecture, and props like wooden walls, window grates, and the piano keyboard, etc. On the other hand, the roundish shapes appear on plates, bus and taxi ceilings, tunnels, the walls in Dongsik's house, etc. Straight lines signify modernity and progress, while round shapes signify dysfunction and failure of modernity. The film critiques modernity by negatively portraying phallic objects like trains. This critique is further emphasized by overlaying materials to nullify the phallic signification. For instance, cigarette smoke creates a hazy atmosphere, and rainwater flowing over the window obscures the view inside. Now, the prologue can be understood why the feast must be unfolded and then be blurred by the smoke. It epitomizes the entire narrative. Why does triadism play a critical role in interpreting the housemaid? According to Lacan, singularity possesses the power of difference that introduces something entirely new, distinct from both universality and exceptionality. The Housemaid is indeed a singular film that emerged in the aftermath of the April Revolution in 1960. Thank you.
Okay, our next presenter is Professor Steve Choi. His presentation is Man, Woman, and the Electric Household, Kim Ji-young's Housemaid films. Okay, come here.
Thank you, Professor Kim Jong-un, for this organizing this. It's so much work, I know. So, okay, so this is an argument about remakes, and trying to think remakes within the context and aesthetics of Kim Ji-young. So, the basic plot to the Housemaid films revolves around a nuclear family that takes in a female household who is of lower economic and social class. Following the first film in 1960, Kim wrote and directed the revivals Woman of Fire in 1971 and Woman of Fire 82 in 1982. Two spin-off films, Insect Woman in 1972 and Carnivorous Animals in 1984, also work with the plot of The Housemaid while differing in a number of their narrative details, as we know. The name of the family patriarch and housemaid herself, and the names are explicitly invoked, is the same in all the films. Dong-sik and Myung-ja, respectively. The housemaid in the 1960 film is not named. In addition to Dong-sik and his wife, who is not given a name, the family includes their two children, a son and a daughter, who are depicted as defiant and naughty. Over the course of the story, the wife and Myung-ja may become pregnant and may successfully give birth to two infants. The drama unfolds mostly in a two-level home that was purchased by the hard-working wife, who is at odds with the housemaid. Dong-sik works as a piano teacher or as a failed businessman, And while he works with their piano, an object that signifies the family's bourgeois aspirations, he nevertheless earns less than his spouse. Tongshik's wife is the family breadwinner in all the household films, working as a seamstress, running a chicken farm in both of the Woman of Fire films, or a company CEO of a construction company in Insect Woman, and a real estate company in Carnivorous Animals. Quote, "I've ruined my business, but my wife was different," the physically impotent Tongshik observes in Insect Woman. "She's a true hero." This emasculated position is underscored after he sleeps with Myung-ja. She becomes his mistress and is confronted by his domineering wife. The woman fights over Tongshik, and because his wife refuses to let herself be humiliated by his adulterous behavior, they agree to share him between them. Myung-ja possesses her own sense of feminine pride and refuses to be used after losing her virginity to Tongshik. Expressing her predicament in Woman of Fire, she remarks that, quote, "My body is not pure anymore. I'm not going to be able to get married." Myung-ja becomes pregnant, and the baby, either born or unborn depending on the film, becomes an object that further provokes the grievances between the warring protagonists. "All children are equal. My baby is dead. Yours should die too," she declares in The Housemaid, reiterating the old law of moral equivalence that demands an eye for an eye. The culmination of this story is typically death for Tongshik and Myung-ja, either by murder or suicide, again depending on the film. In their essay on Kim Ki-young's Housemaid remakes, Nikki J.Y. Lee and Julian Springer propose that each iteration of the Housemaid story imbues the original film with contemporary relevance in that the repetition of plot elements, characters, and settings reflect the continuing significance of its melodramatic plot, while the differences from one film to the next reflect the contingencies of history. I like to radicalize this concept of film revival by considering how the vitality implied by it not only inspires each instantiation of the Housemaid series, but surges in the aesthetics of each work, while bringing forth the animistic vitality that is inherent to the moving image itself. That the characters in Kim's films act out irrationally or in exaggerated ways reflects a wild vitality, which delineates an accelerated movement towards survival above all, and the force of life amplified without exhaustion. His films tend toward fast cutting, soliciting the glance and not a prolonged gaze from the viewer, that constructs narratives through a series of spectacles and outrageous plot turns rather than the accumulation of narrative tension through careful continuity editing. Myung-ja's incendiary behavior and Tongshik's submissive demeanor confound the melodrama surrounding the space of innocence that may be located in the Korean family. These are not the ideal subjects portrayed in national policy films disseminated by Park Chung-hee's Yushin regime. Moral and legal norms are repeatedly disregarded and transgressed throughout the Housemaid films. In Kim's cinema, distinctions between human characters and other non-human beings aim toward disillusion, whereby one is subsumed into the other and bound through the powers of animation. Like a fundamental element, the desperate life force that is embodied by the woman put the non-representational élan vital of Kim's cinema into motion, dissolving analytical categories in film analysis that focus only on character and narrative. Animals are presented to underscore the bestial nature of human beings. Critics and scholars of Kim's cinema have noted the seemingly constant presence of rats throughout all the Housemaid films, as metaphors in the dreams of the characters, appearing in strange cinematic delusions, and of course directly on screen. Further references to animals and non-human forms of life make their way throughout the films. Tongshik advises his daughter in The Housemaid to exercise like the caged squirrel so that her disabled legs can become stronger. When he has sex with Myung-ja in Insect Woman, the chaotic buzz of an insect swarm fills the soundtrack. Appearing later, the baby drinks blood and is even referred to as a kind of vampire. Inanimate objects in Kim's cinema can take on an uncanny life as well, enabled by the vital movements enabled by the animating look of the camera. The appearance of objects like cigarettes, plate of curry rice, a glass of water, a chandelier with colorful orbs, stained glass, hard candies, and the infamous stares that are often interpreted as a status symbol, when they come into contact with human bodies, induce social relations and potentialities. These items may or may not be used appropriately, as a glass of water or a plate of food fulfill the basic need for sustenance and bring human characters together, while also carrying the potential as instruments of murder. In this sense, the ruining force that destroys the traditional family did not originate with the horned housemaid, but was already internal to the cinematic representation of the modern Korean family. Like the contaminating rats that were already in the kitchen, the cinema makes this evident through the story of this household, summoning the beings and objects that occupy it to electric life. During Park's presidency, state apparatuses were tied closely to industry and society, pushing the economy towards aggressive nationalist market expansion and hypergrowth. In the private realm, the Korean family was also expected to participate in the project of nation building and industrialization through an adherence to traditional hierarchies and morality. Men were supposed to be providers for the family through their industrial and military mobilization, while women were responsible for managing the household and its finances. Contextualized within the authoritarian regimes of the 1970s and 80s, led by Park and Chun Doo-won, the period in which the films after The Housemaid were produced, the repetitions of Kim's cinema depict these ideologies around their gender in their most obsessive manifestations, and in so doing reveal their hysterical scope. On the one hand, we can think here of the mass production of textiles, chickens, and eggs, and then the commodification of land and property that track Korea's meteoric economic rise and the nation's mobilization of technology and labor. On the other, the use of the chicken farm in Woman of Fire, as the Woman of Fire films make explicit, the living labor that produces these commodities aims only to reproduce this labor, as chickens and eggs become feed for humans, and in turn, the human bodies become feed for the chickens. The circulation between humans and animals, a kind of circle of life, allegorically turns on the militarized ideology of Korean modernization in the 70s and 80s, and its insistence on the virtues of productivity. Just one more page. In all the household films, the reproduction of human labor and of babies are repeatedly at stake. The production of more bodies that will continue to maintain economic growth. But like the caged animal in Housemaid, living things are not allowed to roam free in Kim's films and must labor endlessly as if on a running wheel. Here is a life pushed towards hyper-production, where the primary aim of men and women in families is to become affluent by producing offspring. Moments in carnivorous animals are particularly humorous, as quantified bits of knowledge of fertility are cited. 200 trucks of rice and 1,000 cows are consumed in a day. Every day, men impregnate women for 5,000 offspring. And then here's a quote about the Myungja character. She talks about having 3,000 eggs in her body. Okay, so this depiction of biopolitical knowledge around the fertility of Korean men and women plainly reflects the ideology of human reproduction while rendering it absurd in its brute facticity on screen. And this is my last sentence. Kim's films not only simulate this national ideology and its insistence on exemplary Koreanness, they also critique it through the depiction of family life as domestic warfare, of life under capitalism overflowing with the desperate pursuit of survival, however paranoid and surreal its means for doing so. Thank you. Sorry for coming over.
Okay, our last presenter is Ariel Schussen, and she will make a presentation about To Speak and Be Spoken For, Japanese Stuttering and the Woman in the Peninsula of Kim. Okay, so yours.